hear about things like Transgender Day of Visibility and men who think they're women. Today, we're going to dig into a big reason why that happens. Welcome to We Are the Watchmen Weekly Live. My name is R.C. Williams.
And I'm Juliana Ormond.
And we have a special guest with us today. Let's bring him on right now. Dr. Z joins us. And Dr. Z, as we do this, congratulations, you are officially moving to Florida. So welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So, Doc, we met a couple of weeks ago and we had a great conversation about what's going on with all this stuff around transgenderism, in particular with children. And as we talked in the studio before we got started, there are so many people that don't even think that this is happening. So, we wanted to bring you on because you've done so much work in this space and you've been bold with the word of God and in trying to help people to understand what's happening here and what's at stake. So, if you wouldn't mind, could you give the audience some background on you, and then we can get into the work that you've been doing?
Sure, absolutely. So the kind of maybe 60-second background. I went to the Ohio State University. I studied biology and chemistry. I did research in thermodynamics of Vibrio cholera, cancer metastasis as it relates to actin-plastin, and some lipidomics and inflammatory cascades in phospholipase D. I graduated magna cum laude. I was part of Sigma Xi, Sigma Alpha Lambda, IDLS, Golden Key. I went on to do a dual MD MS at St. George's University in connection with the University of Southern California Keck School of Medicine. I studied neuroalgorithmic assessment of neuroimaging for the progression of Alzheimer's disease, and I graduated med school in 2019 cum laude. I then went on to do my residency training, my internship and residency at the Brooklyn Hospital Center in New York, in pediatrics specifically.
So, Doc, just so we set the stage and the audience understands what they just heard, what you're about to share with us about what's going on in the world does not come from someone who just decided one day that they were going to call themselves doctor, or they decided they read the back of a cereal carton one day and it was a good idea. You have an extensive track record professionally in medicine. And so you're coming from a position of, here is what's happening medically in the system right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So let's jump into it, Doc. With We Are the Watchmen Weekly, we have covered this entire process of transgenderism over the last year plus. Everything from Joe Biden deciding that the nation needed a transgender day of visibility and that people needed to be affirmed, even though God has already affirmed people. That's who they are, they're his creation. To what's happening with womb transplants, the Wellcome Trust in New England is taking wombs out of female cadavers, putting them into men who think they're women, and determining that that's the moral and right thing to do. And the war on women in general. As we do this show, the issues with Planet Fitness and what's going on and how Planet Fitness has chosen to deal with this. Doc, give us an idea of what's happening with young people in this whole trans thing and people encouraging them to just do these brutal things. What's happening?
There is a lot to unpack. This is a really challenging topic, and there are a lot of aspects to jump into. Let's just start with transgenderism in the first place, right? So transgenderism, or gender dysphoria, as it is called in the DSM, is incongruence with your mental aspect of your gender identity and your physical biology, right? And from a diagnostic perspective, if that lasts for more than 6 months and it causes significant distress in someone's life, they can get diagnosed with gender dysphoria. It was previously known as gender identity disorder in the previous version of the DSM, but they thought that language was a little bit harsh. They didn't want to call it a disorder because it stigmatizes things. So they had altered it. Now, if you go back to the 1960s, John Money, and there's other people involved in this, was one of the first people to really bring this to the main stage, although it has been around for quite some time. Now, the whole idea behind sex and gender being separated is is a strange concept in and of itself, right? Saying that you have, this social structure that determines biology is false on the face. But this historically affected very young females, usually like 5 to 7, 8 years old. And it affected an extremely small percent of the population. I think last I read was 0.01%. Or that's what was taught in med school, at least. And then this was usually rectified by puberty, right? No brainer. People have, confusion when they're little kids. And the other thing is somebody has to put that idea in their head in the first place, right? That you're born in the wrong body, right? That's not something that children would naturally come to. So that's a little bit of the background on the psych behind it. Now, what's been happening recently is out of control. We've seen transgenderism explode between 400 to 1,000% increase, depending on what research you look at. We have some groups of individuals, some age brackets where up to 30% are now identifying as LGBTQ, and this is all pushed for many different reasons. But on its core, it's delusion. Right, it's pure delusion. It meets the criteria for delusional disorder as well, which is a fixed false belief that is not rooted in any reality. Right, so it can be treated as that as well. It could also be treated as body dysmorphic disorder, any of these things. But all of these individuals have underlying anxiety, depression, PTSD, history of sexual abuse, things of that nature. So there's other things that these patients are dealing with, but this has been like lauded and trotted out as the way to deal with this, and it's incredibly harmful. I can't begin to explain how pervasive and how destructive this entire ideology is from the top to the bottom. Now, what they're doing in medicine is they're saying that it's okay to take a child that's prepubescent, right? Let's say normal puberty for a female is 9 to 11. So a prepubescent child, convince them that they are physically born in the wrong body on some spiritual level, right? This is a religious cult. And put them on puberty blockers, the same drugs that are utilized to castrate sex offenders, right, is the same medications they're putting children on. And this causes infertility, psychosis, depression, anxiety. It causes musculoskeletal problems, growth delay, all sorts of extremely significant issues. Then, after they do that, they put them on cross-sex hormones. Cross-sex hormones are going to create a completely unnatural trajectory for both mental and physical. The mental and physical wellness in the body. So this comes with a ton of the same side effects. You can imagine what happens to a man who takes 10 times the testosterone that he's supposed to take, right? The rage, the heart disease, the musculoskeletal issues, all of these things. So that happens. And then the end goal is to wheel them into an operating theater under fluorescent lights and mutilate their bodies cosmetically, alter them, and then carve off their genitals to ensure that they can't reproduce. This is, to be aptly stated, the pharmacological castration and surgical mutilation of our most innocent and vulnerable population. There's no two ways around this. There's no places to sit on the fence with this issue. There's no let people be people. This will go down in history as the greatest human rights violation perpetrated by the medical system ever.
So I heard you say that the money that you're able to make, they did that with the geriatric generation, and now they're targeting the kids and all the people that make the money off of this situation. Can you go down that rundown for us, please?
Sure. So I would say the monetary and economics of this can't be understated. Right. And I don't think people look at it in those terms. But if you can convince a child that they're transgender very, very young, they're going to need lifelong care. And that care is going to include primary care. It's going to include surgery, endocrinology, psychiatry, psychology, and extremely close primary care follow-up. That's a lot of different specialties. It's also going to require all of the nursing staff, all of the clinics, all of these new things. It's also going to require new laws. new litigation, which means new lawyers. There needs to be new education systems, so new teachers. There needs to be new pharmacological studies and new research studies. So there's a ton of research profiteering and lab work and clinical research that will be done on this. This will not stop touching everything. It gets into the schools, and then there's new advocacy groups. It gets into the legislature, and then there's new legal teams. There is nothing this will not touch. And at the end, what it's actually doing is it's destroying the nuclear family unit. It's pitting parents against their children, and then the government is acting like they're the parents of your child and taking your child away from you because you're a bigot. This, I've been fighting against this for quite some time, and it's been a very, very challenging road, because in the beginning, this wasn't happening. And then it was only happening in the rarest, most extreme wild cases, which wouldn't matter anyway. There's no reason to pharmacologically castrate and surgically butcher a child. But then it was really rare cases. And then it wasn't so rare, but we need to let people be people. And then it was, well, even though this is happening, you're going to go after it for the kids first, but then you're going to stop the adults from doing what they want to do. I'm against it all of it. Mm-hmm. There's no, once again, this is one of those positions where there is absolutely no room for even conversation on the matter. This is wrong. This is inherently unethical, and it's evil.
So we had a very interesting situation. I happen to be a mom of 3 kids. My eldest and my youngest are both girls. My eldest is 35, my youngest is 24. The difference between the two of them is very substantial, and it can equate it back to their education. Well, when my youngest one came home one day, she was 14, and she brought her little friend home, and her friend said to me, I'm non-binary. And I looked at her and I'm like, you're what? Because I didn't understand what she said. I had never heard the word non-binary before.
Sure.
So when she said it, I'm like, what is non-binary? And when this little 14-year-old looks at me and goes, I don't identify as a woman or as a man, I looked at her and I'm like, who planted that in her head? What is going on here? Like, I just did not understand the type of programming that was happening. Even to the point that with my youngest, I would say to her, don't ever let anybody touch you with a needle. Never. I had all the religious exemptions so that she wasn't vaccinated, and she did the COVID vaccine, and she even did a booster. And I was just like, what kind of programming was happening that her mom, who had told her entire life, don't ever let anybody touch you with a needle, then all of a sudden she gets the vaccine? Like, that's some serious programming that's happening with our children. And to go from, a rarity, seeing a child who's transgender, confused, to now that we've got about a quarter of our kids are now talking about it and are confused about it. Like, the psychological damage that they've done culturally, because they literally have changed us culturally speaking, is enormous. So you've been watching all this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, it's obviously not organic. This is obviously planned, coordinated. It's global. This isn't just the United States. This is the UK. This is Korea, Australia. This is everywhere across the board. And they have a very tight-knit, organized group that will shut you down. They will come to your house. They will target your work. I mean, it's a very problematic scenario that we're facing here. And once again, it's the children, right? And in some positions, right, it is really just tearing down our country. Mao erased genders in China, right? This was a part of creating androgynous beings for slavery. If you control the minds of the youth, you control the future. And people don't like to talk about this, and it's very uncomfortable, but this is what's actually happening. And the fact is, it's now on the front page of the news. Look at the Schellenberger report with WPATH. It's out in the open now. There's no running from this. So people need to start waking up and paying very close attention to what's happening to their children, because what we're going to see in the future, right? What we're going to see is outrageously high suicide rates. The amount of PTSD that is going to require treatment from this is going to be staggering. The ethics have been thrown completely out of the window. I don't know how medicine got so captured. That's one thing that's really interesting. The people that should be fighting against this the most, which are the psychologists and the psychiatrists, are the ones endorsing and pushing it. And that's, it is, in medicine, we have arguments on when to use medications and when to use surgery on things that absolutely would require medications and surgery. This is something that absolutely should not be medicated and absolutely should not require surgery. So how this happened, the transorbital lobotomy is the last time we used surgical methodology to correct for mental illness. And we look back at that and we say, how barbaric, how did doctors do this? How did they carry this out? Well, now we're seeing doctors remove the healthy breast, testicles, and ovaries of little kids. That we're on a whole nother plane here. And 2 years ago, once again, people were saying this wasn't happening. They just gaslit you into oblivion, while the activists, the trans rights activists, are promoting pedophilia, promoting utter depravity, everything about their whole entire. It's a sex religion. It's a sex cult, and they're pulling little kids into it. I don't know how to be more clear with people than that. But, at the end of the day, what they're going to wind up doing is you'll get called a bigot and a racist and a transphobe and an Islamophobe and every single possible thing that they can latch onto, they're going to. And people have lost careers, lives. People have lost families over this. The amount of destruction is it's incredible what this has actually done.
I don't even know what to say, but I do want to congratulate you on the fact that you were suing our government. Is that not correct?
I sued my hospital network for trying to force gender affirming care. To my knowledge, I'm the only doctor that has ever filed a Supreme Court lawsuit against gender affirming care. And that's, once again, that was in the beginning. It was right after when I found out about this. Right. I had found out about Chloe Cole, if you're familiar with her story. She's a young lady out of California who was put on puberty blockers very young, like 12 or 13 years old, and then had a double mastectomy at 15, I believe. And I read her story and I just thought this can't be real. And I immediately started looking into it, and I reached out to her and spoke to her, and I was just so taken aback by this. And when I went to colleagues and when I went to other medical professionals, I was slandered and told I was a bigot and told that she got what she deserved. She asked for it. And it was just, for a while there, I was just so dumbfounded over all of this. But yeah, it's been a couple of years now. And this was all in the advent of COVID too. So I was already in a very liberal city. I was already blowing the whistle on COVID and all of the research behind COVID and the violation of patient autonomy that occurred during that whole scene. And so I was already walking a tightrope where people were saying you're a conspiracy theorist and you tinfoil hat. And when I pointed out some very basic principles of masking and how that doesn't work. I pointed out the basic principles in pediatrics of masking. If you cover little kids' faces, they don't develop emotionally well, and their neurocognitive abilities to recognize emotional nonverbal cues and things of that nature, social structure, doesn't develop very well. Their voices are muffled, so their speech is developmentally delayed. Their voices are muffled, so when they hear, they have hearing problems and hearing delays, and then they have issues with understanding language. Then you isolate them and keep them out of schools, so they become depressed and they become anxious and they don't know how to interact with their peers. I was saying this in the beginning, and everybody just pushed back on every single stance that was just basic common sense. How do you consent somebody if you don't have relative risks, if you don't have adverse events profiles, if you don't have any research of clinical trials? You can't consent somebody. Then you threaten them with loss of job or their livelihood, or they can't walk into a grocery store. So I was already on thin ice for just going against all of that and fighting for my patients' autonomy and their right to be treated like a human being. And then this hit my radar later. So I was torn in between, both of these, because I've been working on COVID for many years now, with I'm sure all of the big names that and then this hit my desk, and not a whole lot of doctors have paid this much attention, because it was considered like fringe and not really something to talk about. But I actually think that this is a worse violation, right? I'm not trying to downplay anything with COVID, because COVID was genocide or democide, probably more appropriately. So I'm not downplaying that, but what's going on with the transgender stuff is being perpetrated on children. There's a line in the sand. There's a line that cannot get crossed, and that line is kids.
As a mom, I just want to say that this was going on 25 or 30 years ago. They probably would have tried to take my son from me, because he had an older sister and he loved his Barbies and he held on to dolls, and now he's an amazing father. And I would tell people, stop razzing on him because he's a boy just because he's holding a doll. Nobody razzing on a girl if she's holding a doll or she's holding a dump truck. So leave him alone. This is part of life. And I can only imagine what these mothers and these fathers are going through today, having to deal with the situation, or, they're trying to have a Christian home and they're trying to raise their children this way, but yet they're going to school and they're hearing all the satanic stuff and they're being told things that are like not what the parents want the kids to be told. I mean, they're out of control and they're out over the line. And yes, you're right, as far as they're coming after the kids. And I want to know what other parents and what the church is going to do about that, because this really is the war on the children.